Warning. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat involves the discussion of horror and suspense movies. These movies often include violent, frightening, and disturbing content. Also, we sometimes discuss ladies and their lovely physical attributes, and we sometimes discuss topics considered naughty to talk about in polite company. This program is intended for audiences over the age of 18. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello. My name is Helen Trash Panda and I am the Director of Human Resources for PBDCtv. I am here today to tell you about a disturbing incident and its consequences for this week's broadcast. Rather than try to explain the shocking events of the last week, it is easier to just show you. Please be warned that the footage you're about to see is very graphic.
The events started out like any other week in the workplace. We were having our weekly production meeting. As you know, last week we discussed the movie Halloween, and for this week we will be discussing John Carpenter's Halloween 2. We were discussing appropriate companion pieces to discuss along with Halloween 2. I simply observed that we could also do a review of the Halloween 2 remake, created by Rob Zombie. And that's when it happened. I don't think I want to talk about this anymore.
The following images were captured by security cameras during an incident that occurred last week.
First he tied my hands together, and then he tied my feet together and hung me upside down. Then he kept batting at me like some sort of play toy, screaming, "This is what you deserve! This is what you deserve!"
While we respect the contributions that Steve the Cat has made to PBDCtv, we cannot ignore the seriousness of his actions. We will be taking disciplinary actions against Steve the Cat, including a 1-week unpaid suspension from the workplace. We apologize for any offense that may have resulted from Steve the Cat's actions. We hope to be able to move forward constructively once his suspension is complete. Thank you for your attention.
Looks like I'm in charge this week. Hello, and welcome to Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, the place where we have fun discussing horror movies. I am your special guest host, Fancy. I am the associate producer of this program. As you have already heard, Steve the Cat has been suspended from this week's broadcast. The good news is that Steve had already recorded this week's featured film reviews prior to his suspension, so we can still use those. As for the rest of the show, Guinevere and Professor Fluffosaurus will be helping me out so we can carry on without Steve. Tonight we continue our celebration of October and our countdown to Halloween with the discussion of 2 more movies from the Halloween series. And no, we will not be discussing that movie that caused Steve to have his unfortunate meltdown. This episode should be a lot of fun, so we hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, here we go.
Everyone grab your pencils and notebooks. It's time for Steve's vocabulary lesson.
Okay, everybody, it's time to set down your drinks and pick up your pencils because it is time for Steve's vocabulary lesson. This is the part of the show where we review or discover new and inventive words and phrases in an effort to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms that would otherwise try to ban our discussion. We've got 4 words this week, so let's get into it. Word number 1, impostinating. This is a noun that refers to the action of cooking or boiling a character in a large container of hot liquid. Now, a word of caution here. This is distinct from, though related to, insteepenating, which is a term we discussed last season. The difference is this. During insteepenation, a character is dissolved by the liquid. During impostination, the character maintains its physical integrity, although it may become softer. Word number 2, wedding toasting. This is a noun that refers to the action of using one arm to raise a character high, such as when performing a wedding toast, usually after stabbing the character in the back. Word number 3, carbonating. This noun refers to the action of injecting compressed gas into a character's bloodstream, thus inducing an embolism. And finally, word number 4, noggin augering. This is a noun referring to the action of drilling or boring a hole in a character's noggin. Now, this is similar to bosom augering, which we discussed a few weeks back, but typically noggin augering requires either a stationary victim or much better aim. Please keep these terms in mind. They will become important later in the episode, and that is Steve's vocabulary lesson for this week.
Before we get to our featured film reviews, please enjoy this episode of Monster Chat.
Hello and welcome to Monster Chat. I am your host, Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus. Today we will discuss the strange and fascinating history of animatronic creatures and their use in the motion picture industry. The advent of modern animatronics in movies is popularly credited to the 1975 Steven Spielberg film Jaws, which utilized a large mechanical shark in much of the filming. But, to fully appreciate the history of animatronic creatures, we must go back to 12th century Scotland and a monk named Uther Connolly. Uther was a humble man who was dedicated to his order, which had fallen upon hard times as a result of an extended period of financial mismanagement. Eager to help his order, Uther became a part-time sales representative for an organization that ultimately would become the Mary Kay Corporation. Uther was convinced that the harsh climate of the Scottish Highlands would be a gold mine for sales of sunblock and anti-wrinkle creams, and that the profits from his sales would restore financial stability to his order. Unfortunately, Uther did not fully consider the implications of geography and climate upon his plans, and his brief career selling cosmetics came to an end one rainy night when he was struck by lightning while cresting a hilltop on his way to make a delivery. Having died so early in his tenure as a salesman, Uther became a ghost. This brings us back to the filming of Jaws. It is no secret that the animatronic shark used in the filming of Jaws suffered from numerous mechanical malfunctions. Facing a tight shooting deadline and wary investors, a minor studio executive named Preston Hamilton turned to the dark arts and cast a spell to summon the demon Bisepticus the Mighty, whom he begged for assistance. Unable to resist the urge to gather another soul to work in the marketing pyramid for his timeshare vacation business, Bisepticus agreed. However, once the contract had been signed, Bisepticus immediately faced a problem. Bisepticus was a management bureaucrat who, having no marketable skills, knew nothing about repairing mechanical sharks. Faced with the prospect of defaulting upon his contract, Bisepticus delegated the assignment of repairing the shark to one of his subordinates. Thus the task was passed from Bisepticus to Bartholomew the middle manager, and from there to Sir Pentifer the accountant, and from there to Marge the administrative assistant. And so the contract was routed from one demonic organization to another for weeks, until it landed on the desk of a low-level demon named Fancithifia the Glittery. Rather than route the assignment to another department, Fancithifia filed a Form 10920D, which reassigned Uther's ghost to a new sales territory that was contained entirely within the confines of the mechanical shark, effectively possessing the animatronic. After some practice, Arthur learned to control the shark's movements, and, once he had gotten over his fear of the water, filming resumed. The production of Jaws was saved. Naturally, Bicepticus took all of the credit for this success, and Fancifia the Glittery faded into obscurity. His whereabouts are unknown at present, although there has been some unfounded speculation. Once word spread of this success, the practice of binding ghosts to animatronic creatures became standard practice in Hollywood, as mastering the dark arts is far preferable to mastering the science of control system engineering. Occasionally the demons themselves take a leading role in the process, such as when the demon Heinrich the Naughty possessed an animatronic goat for production of the Austrian film Hagar-Zusa. Heinrich the Naughty was banished from the demonic realm soon after the release of Hagar-Zusa, as there are some things that even demons find creepy. At the present time, all of the animatronic creatures currently employed in modern filmmaking and in modern theme parks are vessels that contain a ghost or a demon. Interestingly, Preston Hamilton was able to get out of his contract with Bicepticus by pointing out that he was a member of the Church of Scientology. Although technically not all church members are bound by billion-year contracts with the church's C organization, Bicepticus was wary of a protracted legal battle with the church and therefore agreed to let Preston buy his way out of the contract, in exchange for 2 points on the back end and a cut of the t-shirt sales. This explains, in part, the popularity of Scientology within the filmmaking industry. As a final note, some filmmakers have attempted to avoid demonic entanglements by replacing traditional animatronic creatures with computer graphics. While this does remove demons from the equation, it requires the filmmakers to negotiate with the Ethernet Gremlins Union, which produces a series of different complications. But that is a story for another time. This has been Monster Chat with Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus. Thank you for joining me.
And now it's time for our featured film reviews.
Let's get into our first featured film review for this week. The film is Halloween 2. You see the poster right there, and understand we are talking about the original version of Halloween 2 here, not the wretched Rob Zombie remake. This is an iconic slasher film that was released in the year 1981. Was directed by Rick Rosenthal, and the cast includes Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance, and an assortment of unknowns and B-movie actors you've never heard of. Let's talk about setting your expectations for this film. So, what to expect? This is an iconic, genre-defining slasher film from the 1980s. Why you should watch it is that this is an iconic slasher movie that every horror fan should see at least once, and also it sets up critical details for future sequels in the Halloween series. If you like the original Halloween, or if you like Friday the 13th or Scream, you should enjoy this movie as well. So let's talk about calibrating your expectations a little bit. Here's the scale we use every week. On the far left, very campy movies. This does not necessarily mean the far left is bad movies. It means it's movies that are silly that you're supposed to go into expecting them to be silly, and so you go in not expecting to take the movie seriously. On the far right, very serious movies such as Silence of the Lambs. Halloween 2 is more or less straight down the middle. I've put it a little bit to the right of straight down the middle. There's not a whole lot of real comedy in this. There's a couple of light comedic moments just to break the tension, just like you would have in real life in a situation like this, but nothing over the top. But at the same time, you've got characters that are one-dimensional and in some cases intentionally unlikable, and that kind of moves you towards the center of the scale. So let's talk about a film summary for Halloween 2. This is an iconic 1980s slasher film that continues the story that began in the original 1978 Halloween. The film picks up immediately after the events of the original film. In fact, the first few moments of Halloween 2 are literally reused from the ending of the original Halloween. Michael Myers has escaped from Smith's Grove Mental Institution and returned to his hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois, where he murdered 6 teenagers. Michael was shot repeatedly at the end of the first Halloween, but has disappeared, so a manhunt ensues. In the meantime, lone survivor Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, is taken to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital for treatment. While the authorities are hunting for Michael, Michael hunts for Laurie, and so you've got a game of cat and mouse and cat and mouse. So 2 games of cat and mouse going on simultaneously. Let's talk about the villain profile. Our villain is, of course, the legendary Michael Myers. And I've said Michael Myers 1981. I am not going to attempt to do a profile of all 10 versions of Michael Myers that have appeared through the various movies. So we're just going to talk about Michael Myers as he appears in Halloween 2, the 1981 version. There you see him. He is of the slasher serial killer class. As far as special powers go, it's always an interesting discussion about Michael Myers, because Michael is literally the boogeyman, although it's unclear precisely how or what that means. He is cunning, he is immensely strong, and he is seemingly impervious to damage. As far as signature weapons go, now we always associate Michael Myers with a big kitchen knife. In this particular film, he uses multiple weapons, but he does prefer stabbing weapons. But more so than a kitchen knife, in this film he frequently uses surgical tools to stab people. His signature technique is unexpected ambush strikes. So basically he kind of pops out of the shadows at the last second and gets you. Let's talk about things Steve liked about this film. This is a worthy follow-up to what is considered, or what I consider, the most iconic slasher film of all time. It picks up immediately after the first film and continues with the same feel and with much of the same cast, so you can watch the 2 films back to back and it feels like one continuous story. There are more kills in this film than in the original, but it manages to stop short of being too over the top, so it doesn't become just a slaughter fest. It still relies upon an atmosphere of tension and suspense. Michael gets more creative in this film, but stops short of being ridiculous. So it's not like, I believe it was Halloween 6, where he killed somebody by picking him up and slamming him against the electrical panel for the house, and the guy gets electrocuted and then his head pops like a balloon. There's none of that. So he's creative, but it's not ridiculously creative. Watching Michael work his way through town in plain sight builds suspense, like watching a shark below a group of oblivious swimmers. Now, since this picks up, seconds after the first movie ended, many people in town still haven't really heard the news and don't know what's going on. So you've got this guy walking around in a mask on Halloween night when lots of people are wearing masks. Nobody knows there's anything unusual about him, so he's able to just kind of walk his way down the street through a crowd of people and nobody really knows. And as I've said, it is much like watching a shark circling among a bunch of oblivious swimmers that at any moment he could lash out and strike and take out any number of these people. But on the other hand, he's probably not going to. He's not going to do something stupid that's going to draw attention to himself in the midst of a big crowd. But on the other hand, that at some point he's going to bite somebody. Finally, it's a frickin' Halloween movie. I just love the Halloween series. I even love the bad movies in this series. I mean, Halloween 6, not a great movie. Halloween Resurrection, not a great movie, but I watch them every time they're on TV anyway. I just love them. Let's talk about some things that could have been better. This is not a $200 million budget film with Olivier caliber actors. Apart from Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance, it's just a bunch of B-movie actors. And, it's a low-budget movie, so that shouldn't surprise anybody. Jamie Lee Curtis feels underutilized in this film. She spends a significant amount of time sleeping or sedated, leaving the rest of the cast to carry much of the film. Now, that's reasonably realistic given the events of what is going on, but at the same time, it just seems like she's not there for as much of the movie as you would expect her to be, given that she has top billing. The early 80s lighting and early 80s filmmaking technology may make the film look dated to younger viewers. I don't consider that a problem with the movie. I'm just bringing it up. If you're the kind of person that cannot enjoy a film because the production values are not contemporaneous with your own life, then that's a problem with you and not the movie. You need to be able to watch older movies and just appreciate them rather than look at them and say, hey, that's not even shot on a digital camera. It's like, well, of course it wasn't shot on a digital camera. There were no mainstream affordable digital cameras in 1981. There is some overacting. Now, that is in part just due to the fact that you've got some B-movie actors, and in part it's just kind of the style of the time, or particularly the style of horror movies of the time. Slasher movies often rely on characters occasionally doing inexplicable things to move the story along, and this one is no exception. There's going to be plenty of moments when you say, oh God, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Don't do that. That's kind of part of the fun, though. Younger fans and fans of modern horror may find the killings and special effects a bit pedestrian, and again, I don't see that as a negative at all. I just see that as this movie was made in 1981, not in 2017, and again, if you are unable to enjoy a movie because its existence is not contemporaneous with your existence, because you were born in 1999 and so you can't enjoy anything made before 1999, that's a problem with you. That is not a problem with the film. Finally, Halloween 2 introduces a twist that some may feel is unnecessary. It's an important twist, but it's a twist that, it's a matter of taste. Some people may say there was no need to introduce that. It becomes an important twist for Halloween 4, 5, and 6, and becomes an important twist for Halloween H2O and Halloween Resurrection, and then by not having made Halloween 2 part of the continuity in the current series, this twist is not part of the story of the current Halloween timeline, going from the original Halloween to Halloween 2018. So they've done the series both ways, so you kind of get to see it play out both ways. And yes, I am trying to talk around the twist just on the off chance that there's somebody out there who has not seen this movie. I don't want to spoil it for them. So let's get to Steve's scorecard for Halloween 2. Kills, 10. Bare breasts, 2. And they're pretty nice. Possumings, 1. Impostinatings, 1. Carbonatings, 2. Now I've said 1 is assumed. We see 1 happen on screen. We see the victim after the fact, so we assume that he died from carbonating. It's the most logical explanation for why the character is dead. Bathtub de-stop rings, going all the way back to the very first episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Bathtub de-stop rings, there is one of those. Infuegoinatings, not 1, not 2. There are 3 different characters set ablaze in this film. Cats and clampings. There's 1, although it's relatively minor. And finally, wedding toasts. Yes, there is a wedding toast in this film. But you also get some bonus features when you watch Halloween 2. You get Granny wasn't stabbed, but she probably died of a heart attack, and that happens pretty early in the film. You get Sheriff Bracken says goodbye to Annie. Now, one of the really tragic things about the original movie Halloween is Nancy Loomis plays the character of Annie Bracken, who is Laurie Strode's best friend and is also the daughter of Sheriff Bracken. Annie Bracken is killed by Michael Myers basically halfway through the original Halloween, and Sheriff Bracken does not know. Sheriff Bracken spends the entirety of the rest of the film driving around town with Dr. Loomis looking for Michael Myers, not knowing that his daughter has been murdered. And even you make it all the way to the end of the movie and to the end credits and you never see him find out. In Halloween 2, you do get to see him find out that his daughter was one of the victims in the first movie. But even in Halloween 2, it doesn't happen right off the bat. You have to make your way through a little bit of the movie with events unfolding more or less in real time before more victims are found from the first movie, and they're able to get to the sheriff and let him know that his daughter has been killed, and it's very heartbreaking. You get drunken doctors. The doctor has been at the country club and he has had a few. You get incompetent security guards. You get stop! It's hammer time! Yeah, you'll understand that when you watch the movie. You get concussed EMTs. You get pillow stabbing. You get an early Christmas gift to the local tire dealer. You get ongoing infaucination. Yes, the entirety of the law enforcement apparatus of Haddonfield, Illinois is at the beck and call of Dr. Samuel Loomis. And Dr. Samuel Loomis is wearing a trench coat and not a lab coat, but I'm still going to call it an infaucination. And finally, why does the hot tub even have that setting? So let's get to Steve's final score for Halloween 2. Ooh, we're going to give it 3.5 paws out of 4. It is a worthy follow-up to the legendary Halloween. It manages to continue and extend the story without jumping the shark. It still relies on tension and suspense instead of blood and gore, although there is more blood and gore in this film than in the first film because they made enough money off of the first film to actually have a special effects budget. But still, compared to modern-day horror movies, this one is fairly tame in terms of the blood and gore, but there definitely is some blood in this movie. So that is Steve's final score for Halloween 2.
And now a word from our benevolent overlords at PBDCtv, your nightly heartbeat of horror.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDCtv.
Oh, hi! First thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.
Let's get into our second featured film review for today. We're going to talk about the film Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. There's the poster there, and I don't care what anyone has said about this movie, that poster is really cool. This is a horror sci-fi supernatural mashup film that was released in 1982. It was directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who also wrote the script. And the cast includes Tom Atkins, Stacey Nelkin, and Dan O'Herlihy. Now, this was produced by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, but not written or directed by John Carpenter. Let's talk about setting expectations for this film, because this is a very, very important discussion to have when discussing Halloween 3. What should you expect? Halloween 3 Season of the Witch is an unjustly maligned horror sci-fi conspiracy movie from the 1980s. Why you should watch? This was unsuccessful at the time, but it has developed a cult following and has aged reasonably well. It gives an idea of the anthology style that was originally intended for the Halloween series. Now, let me unpack that a little more. We talked about this some last week, but it bears repeating again. When John Carpenter and Deborah Hill first came up with the concept for Halloween, they did not intend for it to be a franchise of slasher movies about Michael Myers. They did intend for it to possibly become a franchise of movies released every year at Halloween, but the intention was for it to be like an anthology, something where it might be a different story, a different genre or variety of horror every year. So it would be something more along the lines of Tales from the Crypt, or Creep Show, or from the 1980s Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Nightmares TV series, stuff that tells different stories. But the idea was, instead of the traditional anthology idea where you release a full-length motion picture and it's made of 3, 4, or 5 short films, the anthology would be year to year, so it would be different standalone films every year. So that's what they intended to do. Now, they did not anticipate how successful the original film Halloween was going to become and how iconic the character Michael Myers was going to become. So they made Halloween 2 because, you can't turn down that kind of money. But after Halloween 2 was finished, John Carpenter basically felt as if, okay, we have told the story of Michael Myers, we have brought that story to a close, it is time to move on and tell another story. Halloween 3 Season of the Witch was supposed to be a totally different standalone story, not even in the same universe, because if you pay attention in Halloween 3, you will see commercials for the original Halloween on television. So it's not even different events happening in the same cinematic universe. It's a completely different universe. Now, unfortunately, people didn't get that when the movie came out, or else they didn't care. And so Halloween 3 was unsuccessful, but I'm going to try to review the film based upon whether or not I enjoyed the film and not based upon what people thought at the time. But the reason we have made setting your expectations such an important part of film reviews for Season 2 of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat is exactly this, that what you expect going into a movie can drastically alter your perception. If you like The Fog, or The Thing, or the original Halloween, you should like Halloween 3. So let's talk about calibrating your expectations a little bit. Here's the scale we like to show. On the far left, very campy, very silly movies. Sharknado, Jason X. Understand, being on the left side of the scale does not mean it's a bad movie. It means it's the kind of movie you go into expecting something silly and expecting to have fun, kind of poking fun at the movie. On the far right, very serious movies that make you think about very serious thoughts and very serious themes. Halloween 3, I'm going to put right down the middle between the two. It works really well, because if you want to go into this and think deep thoughts and think about the profound implications of what's going on in this movie, you can enjoy it. And if you just want to go in and kind of poke fun and laugh at the events that are going on, you can do that too. So let's give a quick film summary. Once again, there's the awesome poster. This is a horror, sci-fi, conspiracy, mystery mashup with supernatural elements that, as we said, is completely unrelated to Halloween and Halloween 2. It tells the story of a middle-aged man, a doctor, and a young woman who are united by circumstance and together investigate a grisly murder. As the film opens, a delirious patient is brought into a hospital clutching a rubber Halloween mask. The patient is admitted and sedated. Soon after, a mysterious man in a suit slips into the patient's room and murders him, and then goes out in the parking lot, sits down in his car, and immolates himself. Stung by these events, the admitting physician, the doctor who admitted the patient, and the patient's daughter, who shows up to identify the body, team up to investigate the murder, because obviously she wants to know what happened, and he is just shaken by the fact that somebody walked into his hospital and did this for no reason that anybody can seem to understand. The investigation leads them to the Silver Shamrock Novelty Company, who manufactured the Halloween mask that the delirious patient was clutching when he was brought in. And at the Silver Shamrock Novelty Company, not all is as it appears, and I can't go into much more than that without giving spoilers. Trigger warning about this movie. As they dig into this, they're going to dig into a plan for a conspiracy, and I'm going to tell you right now, that conspiracy delves into violence against children. If that is the kind of thing that triggers you that you cannot handle, stay away from this film. Things that Steve liked about this film. This movie is interesting if you can shake yourself out of the mindset that a Halloween film automatically must involve Michael Myers. If you go into this expecting a slasher movie with Michael Myers, then obviously it's not what you were after. But that is an issue with your expectations, not with the movie. The movie was never intended to be a slasher film because the Halloween series was never intended to be a series of slasher films. The film has aged reasonably well. In fact, I like it more now than when I viewed it years ago. When I first saw this movie not too long after it came out in the 80s, I thought, it's okay. And even a few years ago when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, okay, that's better than I remember, but it's okay. Having just rewatched it again maybe an hour ago to put my final notes together before putting this review in the can, I gotta say, I like it a lot more than I did originally. The concept and story are very interesting if you can get past the fact that it's not a slasher movie. It is not afraid to break traditional rules and taboos, and that kind of gets into that trigger warning I talked about a moment ago. The plot at the heart of the film is deeply and truly horrifying if you can shake yourself out of the slasher film mindset and appreciate the magnitude of what is being perpetrated. Now, in a slasher film, the horror and the terror is right there on the screen. You see it unfolding before you. You see somebody getting stabbed or whatever. In this movie, you see some stuff, but what you have to think about and let play out in your mind is the magnitude of what is going to happen afterwards. And if you can do that, it's truly shocking. This movie blends ancient Celtic myth with modern science, and that's someplace that they ended up going in the Halloween series anyway. Once you get into Halloween 4, 5, and 6, when they just returned to making the movies about Michael Myers, they got into the Curse of Thorn, and particularly in Halloween 6, there were scientists who were studying Michael Myers, and as you get into the laboratory, you see they don't explain it in tremendous detail, but you see charts that, for lack of a better word, are mapping ancient Celtic runes to sequences of amino acids, and you can see that they're trying to bring science and magic together, or implying that science and magic are the same thing. Stacey Nelkin in this film is fantastic. The villain is creepily compelling. He's very good. And there are voice cameos by Jamie Lee Curtis and Nancy Loomis, although by this point she was going by Nancy Keys. Now, Jamie Lee Curtis played Laurie Strode in the original Halloween and Halloween 2. Nancy Loomis played Annie Bracken in the original Halloween, and I guess you could say she was also in Halloween 2 because she has a very brief appearance as a dead body. So they managed to bring in voice cameos from two of the stars of the original. Jamie Lee Curtis is the voice of the announcer in the factory town and also the voice of the telephone operator. Nancy Loomis is the voice of Tom Atkins' ex-wife, who you never see in the film, but you do hear her bitching at him on the phone. Things that could have been better. 1980s lighting and filmmaking technology, this does not look like a recent film. That is not a problem for me, but that can be a problem for some people. It is mostly B-movie caliber actors. Stacey Nelkin is good. Beyond that, it's nothing to write home about. It has more than its share of 80s era overacting and underacting. Some of the characters are a little over the top with their lines. Some of them are a little flat. It's a 1980s low-budget horror movie. You kind of have to bake that in. It is not a particularly big-budgeted movie. I would argue that they made good use of what they had. I think the special effects in this are competent. They're reasonable. It's not Jurassic Park, but this was made more than a decade before Jurassic Park. You get early 80s sci-fi special effects. Since this is a horror sci-fi mashup, you do have the occasional special effect that looks like, a ball of energy or a laser. It's fine, judged by the standard of the time. If you're judging it against Guardians of the Galaxy or something like that, then yeah, obviously it's not going to look as good. It does not have as much action or excitement as a slasher movie or a monster movie. Instead, you're following the lead characters around as they unravel a conspiracy, so it's a little slower paced. You could even say maybe it drags a little bit in the middle. Some have argued that the villain's motivation is lacking or not well explained, or there's not a real good reason why he's doing what he's doing. I disagree. Having watched this several times, I think the villain explains things well enough, but you have to listen. You have to listen to the very end of his little monologue, and you have to use some imagination. He does not get into excruciating details like a James Bond supervillain where he lays out every last detail of his plan, but he tells you enough that you should understand why he's doing what he's doing. So Steve's scorecard for Halloween 3. Kills, and this is a little confusing, 12, plus at least 12 more, plus 1 implied. So what do I mean by that? So you see 12 kills on screen. You also see an event on screen that would have resulted in the death of at least 12 more, but it's hard to get an accurate count. So think back to last season when we reviewed the vampire movie, The Night Watchman. And towards the end of that movie, somebody tears the curtain down from the windows and suddenly a whole room full of vampires goes poof. Well, it's impossible to get a good count. This is a similar kind of situation where I counted at least 12 more, but it's hard to say. Now, what do I mean by 1 implied? Without giving away any spoilers, there is a twist at the end of this film, and when that twist happens, you have to assume that it means that one character is dead, but we have not seen that, so we don't know it for a fact, and we don't know how it happened if it did. Bare breasts. 1, and that's covered up by Tom Atkins' lips, so good for him, not so good for her. Plus you get a shower door tease. Car chases. I'm calling it 1 with an asterisk. It's more of an off-road adventure with a single car, but it did involve a stunt driver and a roll cage and a helmet, so we're going to count it. Possumings. 1 low-speed possuming plus 2 near misses. Denogginings. There are 2. Nogginoggerings. There is 1. And Infuegoinatings. There is 1. But with your viewing of Halloween 3, you also get some bonus features, such as the use of a TV news report to provide exposition. Yeah, it's a lazy trope. It's not as bad as using telephone to provide exposition, and frankly, had they not done this, the end of the movie would not have made sense. So it's just something they did at the very beginning, and then it kind of resurfaces at the end of the movie. It's not great, but I can't really, if I were a writer, I could not think of a better way to bring this piece of knowledge to the audience's attention other than to do what they had done, and the movie is better off with it than without it. But it is kind of in your face, hey, you will need to know this later in the film. It's not quite as bad as the Cars for Kids jingle, but it still hurts, and if you watch the film, you'll understand what I'm talking about. What is it with young women throwing themselves at Tom Atkins? In this movie, Stacey Nelkin just cannot wait to share a hotel room with him, and Tom Atkins was also in the 1980 John Carpenter movie The Fog, and Jamie Lee Curtis was on top of him almost immediately. I do not get it. I don't know if he was the inventor of Axe body spray, but I would like to understand his power so I can figure out how to reproduce it. Don't get too close, you'll ruin your eyes. That becomes really funny as the movie goes on. Watch the Magic Pumpkin, or don't. I'm going to say don't. You get noggin melting. You get Halloween commercials on TV. You get the classic 1970s, early 80s unhappy ending. This was kind of a staple of horror and sci-fi movies in the 70s and 80s. It was the cultural hangover from Vietnam and Watergate, and a lot of times movies ended with, I think of the old bad movie Clonus the Parts Horror, Parts the Clonus Horror, where all the heroes are killed at the end of the movie. And finally, you get Tom Atkins' Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Now, far back in a previous life, Steve the Cat spent many years designing automobiles for a living, and as much as it pains Steve the Cat to say anything great about the General Motors Corporation, the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme was kind of the iconic car of the 1980s. They sold hundreds of thousands of them every year. They were everywhere. My best friend drove one, and lots of us from that era just have very happy memories of the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. So for those of us of the right generation watching this movie, you'll probably get a warm feeling just seeing an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme on the screen. So Steve's final score for Halloween 3 is 3 paws out of 4. We're going to call this an unfairly maligned movie that is unusual, interesting, and enjoyable if you go in with the correct expectations. And whatever you do, do not say to Steve the Cat, "There's no Michael Myers in this movie." Because if you say that, you're going to be told to just gather up your belongings, stand up, step away from the dinner table, and go sit at the children's table along with people who complain that their sushi is raw and their gazpacho is cold. No, there's no Michael Myers in it. There was not supposed to be Michael Myers in it. That is not a valid criticism. Anyway, that is Steve's final score for Halloween 3. We are approaching the end of yet another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, but before we go, let's take a minute to talk about some other stuff Steve watched this week. Number 1, Tales of Halloween. This is a Halloween-themed horror anthology involving intersecting stories that all occur in the same town on Halloween night. A number of the stories are campy, but there are some scary moments as well. It's kind of a mixture. There's probably a good almost dozen different stories in this one. At least one of them is an outright comedy, where you have a Jason Voorhees type character chasing a cheerleader, and then through a chain of events, the tables turn and you end up with the cheerleader chasing Jason Voorhees. Some of the stories are just outright scary. It's an anthology. It's something that on the order of Tales from the Crypt or Creepshow or something along that line. It's above average. It is definitely seasonally appropriate. I would include it in your Halloween viewing rotation. I would say it's worth watching. Second film, And Then You Die. This is a film that is absolutely not worth watching. In this film, a loser named Sam has a terrible life, is dumped on by everyone, is murdered, and then returns from the grave from revenge. At least that's what I got from the description of the film online. I had to go by that as opposed to my own experience because I could not finish this film. I bailed out at the 27-minute mark. I'm surprised that I made it through 27 minutes of this, and I'm kind of horrified that I gave 27 minutes of my life to this movie. It is terrible acting, terrible writing, terrible lighting, terrible camera work. There is nothing about this film that is not terrible. No, 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 no. Do not watch this film. I mean, I have to tell you, Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat is the creation in its entirety of one person working with a cat. It's shot entirely with a Samsung Galaxy S8 cell phone and a Canon T6 SLR digital camera, and it's all mixed on a Microsoft Surface Pro 3 computer, and that's it. And we have no budget. We spend no money. And yet somehow we turn out something that looks way more professional than this movie. I just don't get it. I don't know. It just seems to me that just by coincidence you would have put out something better than this. But no, I don't get it. Third film, Batman The Long Halloween Part 1. This is a Warner Brothers 2D animated film based upon the legendary graphic novel. If you are not familiar with Batman comics, if you're not a fan of the Batman universe, Batman The Long Halloween is just one of the classic graphic novel stories of the Batman mythos. It tells the story of Batman's efforts to track down the killer that they have nicknamed Holiday, who murders a different figure from organized crime families on every holiday, starting on Halloween and then moving on into Thanksgiving and Christmas and so on, then going all the way around the clock to the next Halloween, hence the name The Long Halloween. Not only is he committing murders on every holiday, he's committing murders of connected gangland types and risking a giant mob war within Gotham City. This is a pretty good adaptation of the classic comic. For those of you who are uninitiated or not Batman fans, just be aware that the movie The Dark Knight was loosely inspired by The Long Halloween, and so The Long Halloween may feel a bit derivative to you. That won't bother you if you're a Batman fan because you understand all of this. For me, the one criticism I have of this is just a practical one. The style of the animation seemed a little too clean looking for me. The lines were a little too sharp, the colors were a little too clean for what is ultimately a gangster film noir kind of study. I think that's more driven by the economics of 2D animated filmmaking more than anything else, but it just didn't have the same gritty, dirty appearance that I would associate with the graphic novel. But I would recommend it, so recommend Batman The Long Halloween Part 1. You can find that one on Blu-ray. You can probably find it in a Redbox machine or rent it online. And Then You Die is available for free, and there's a reason for that. Just leave it alone. Stay away from that one. Tales of Halloween, available to stream in a variety of places. I found it free on Tubi. I would recommend that one. So that's other stuff Steve watched this week.
Well, that brings us to the end of our latest Halloween tribute episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. I know Steve appreciates the support, and he would thank you himself if he were only allowed to be here. Now, if you did enjoy the show, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and follow. You can find us on Facebook at Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. And yes, that's Tales with an A-I-L-S. Also, please remember to check out all of my friends and their great programming on PBDCtv. Whether you're interested in horror, true crime, weird history, or unexplained events, we're sure to have something for you. And PBDCtv is easy to find. We're on the World Wide Web at PBDCtv.com, and we're on YouTube at PsychoBunnyDC. We've also got a large presence on Facebook. You can find the mothership at PBDCtv, or you can go directly to dedicated pages for channels such as Psycho Bunny Death Cult, Psychomandium 13, and Roots Bleed Red. Each channel has a slightly different atmosphere, but they're all a part of the PBDCtv broadcast collective. We'll be back with 2 more Halloween-themed movies next week as we wrap up the month of October, so we hope to see you again next week. In the meantime, thank you once again for joining us. Everyone stay safe and have a great week. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.